we come to the final topic of chapter 1 in this course, and that is to do with cardinality of sets. Okay, so remember that for any set A, the cardinality of the set is denoted by mod A, right? And what is cardinality? I hope you've encountered this term before. The cardinality of a set is simply the number of elements in the set. Okay, so if a set has 3 elements, then we say that its cardinality is 3. Okay, so we understand this, we understand what it means to say that such and such is the cardinality of a set. And when it comes to finite sets, right, it is therefore obvious what it means to say that, say, the cardinality of set A is more than the cardinality of set B, right? For example, if A has 10 elements and B has 5, then of course the cardinality of A exceeds cardinality of B. Okay, but why are we talking about cardinality when we are studying real numbers at this point? It turns out that there is in fact a very useful notion of comparing cardinalities of sets even when the associated sets are actually infinite. Okay, so for example, A could be the set of rationals, B could be the set of reals. It still makes sense. Of course, both of these are infinite sets. It still makes sense to ask whether the cardinality of the set of reals is more than the cardinality of set of rationals. Okay, and note that nothing about our basic counting understanding of set cardinality will help us compare the cardinality of infinite sets. Okay, so we need a completely different notion of set cardinality comparison to be able to perform this. And it turns out it's actually useful to be able to even compare cardinalities of infinite sets. Okay, so that is the last bit of development that we are going to cover in this first chapter. And the development that I'm going to basically describe to you is actually due to the mathematician Cantor. Cantor was the first person to be able to come up with this notion of how it is that one compares the size of infinite sets. Okay, so it's a very beautiful development in its own right, and we will see that it's in fact useful to talk about different grades of infinity when it comes to set cardinality. Right, at the end of this this section, you will basically see that the infinity of the rationals is not the same as the infinity of the reals. The infinity of the reals is in some sense bigger than the infinity of the rationals, and so on, right? So, and it turns out that this this way of being able to talk about the cardinalities or compare the cardinalities of infinite sets is actually extremely useful. Okay, so yeah, with that introduction, let's actually begin. Now, to do this, I need to first just remind you on some basic notation when it comes to functions itself. So since you probably have not seen this in recent times, I'm going to give you a quick recap of this. Okay, so here is a recap on just function notation. So firstly, for a function, we typically denote, let's say the function is denoted by f, we typically write the function as f colon a to b. The a here is the domain of the function and b is the codomain of the function. Okay, and what is a function? A function is basically a mapping from elements of a to elements of b. So a function f, a function, let's say, maps every element of its domain to a unique element in its codomain. Right? So therefore, for some element a belonging to the domain, f of a belongs to the codomain. Okay, and this f of a is sometimes also referred to as the image of a under the function f. Okay, so this is just the standard definition of a function. The reason I'm bringing this up is I basically now need to define, rather remind you the definitions of injective functions, surjective functions, and bijective functions. Okay, so let me begin with injective functions. So we say that f is injective or one-to-one if the following condition is true. Intuitively, a function is injective if no two elements of the domain essentially map to the same element of the codomain. Okay, if for x, y in A, x not equal to y, f of x is not equal to f of y. So for any two distinct elements of the domain, their image should be distinct as well, right? So pictorially, you have a set A, you have the codomain, let's say B. With an injective function, you can never have the scenario where the element x maps to this element in B, and the element y also maps to the same element of the codomain. So this is, well, this picture basically illustrates what it means for a function to not be injective. Okay, so injective is also called one-to-one, and again, intuitively it makes sense, right? When you say that a function is one-to-one, it means that distinct elements in the domain should map to distinct elements of the codomain. If the function satisfies that property, then it is said to be injective or one-to-one. Okay. Next, we say that a function is surjective or onto if essentially every element of the codomain is basically the mapping corresponding to some element of the domain. Essentially, the entire codomain is covered, by images of the images of elements in the domain, by this function f. If for any, let's say, y in B, there exists an x in A such that f of x is equal to y. In other words, a function is onto if every element in the codomain is the image of some element of the domain. Okay, so in that case, we call the function to be surjective or onto. And yeah, so these are largely recaps. I hope that you have seen these notions before. And then finally, I need to tell you what a bijective function is. A bijective function is one that is both one-to-one and onto. In other words, a function is bijective if it is both injective and surjective. Okay, so it is primarily through this notion of bijections and injections that we are going to define our notion of set cardinality. Okay, so if I'm assuming that these definitions you are comfortable with, yeah. So one thing I should note is that, what does it mean to say that a function is a bijection? It means that every element in so therefore it has to be both one-to-one and onto. So you cannot, no two elements of the codomain can be the image of the same element of the domain, and every element of the codomain should be, in this manner mapped. So in other words, there is a unique, mapping between elements of the domain. Every element of the domain is associated with a unique element of the codomain. Every element of the codomain is associated with a unique element of the domain, right? So that is what it means for a function to be bijective. So now we come to Cantor's genius, right? Cantor was able to come up with this notion of cardinality comparison based on, find functions that are definable between the two sets. Okay, so now I'm going to get into Cantor's definition. So according to Cantor, two sets A and B are equicardinal right? Equicardinality is denoted by mod A is equal to mod B. if there exists a bijection f, let's say from A to B. Okay, so yeah, so according to Cantor, two sets are simply equicardinal if there is a bijection, if there exists a bijection between, let's say, one set to the other. Okay, now you should convince yourself that this notion of equicardinality is aligns perfectly with our understanding of cardinality comparison when it comes to finite sets. If you have two finite sets, it turns out they are equicardinal if and only if there is a bijection between the two sets, right? Because if you have a bijection defined on a finite domain, that would imply that the codomain and the domain have exactly the same number of elements. Okay, so now when so this definition of equicardinality is consistent with our notion of equicardinality for finite sets, but the magic here is that it also extends to infinite sets. I can even ask whether two infinite sets are equicardinal based on this definition. They are equicardinal if there exists a bijection going from A to B. And remember, you can note that equicardinality is a symmetric notion, and this comes from the fact that if there is a bijection from A to B, there is also clearly a bijection from B to A, right? That bijection would be called the inverse of the function f. Okay, so this is the first definition. Then we can also talk about what it means for one set to have a larger cardinality than the other. Okay, so given two sets A and B, we will say mod A is great, let's say, yeah, mod A is greater than mod B if the following is true. There exists an injection f going from B to A, but there does not exist a bijection okay. So this is what, according to Cantor, it means for one set A to have a larger cardinality than another set B. Okay, so if A has a larger cardinality than A will have a larger cardinality than B by definition if from B to A you can define an injection, but it is not possible to define a bijection from B to A. Right? So in other words, it is possible to define a one-to-one function going from B to A, but it is not possible to define a function that is both one-to-one and onto, mapping B to A. Okay, again, I would like you to pause at this point and convince yourself that this is perfectly consistent with our notion of set cardinality comparison when it comes to finite sets. If you have a set B which has 3 elements, and if you have a set A with 5 elements, it is indeed possible to define a one-to-one mapping from B to A, but it is not possible to define a bijection from B to A. Okay, so again, the power of these notions is that they are consistent with our understanding of cardinality comparison for finite sets, but they actually naturally extend also to infinite sets. Okay, now, so I have told you what it means for one arbitrary set A to be equicardinal with another arbitrary set B. I have said what it means for the cardinality of A to be greater than the cardinality of B. Okay, now what one needs to show, which we won't because that's a deeper result, is that that cardinalities of sets are always comparable. Okay, so if I give you any two sets A and B, you will either have that cardinality of A is greater than cardinality of B, or one of the strict inequalities, so to speak, hold. Right, so for any sets A, B, we have either you have that A and B are equicardinal, or cardinality of A exceeds cardinality of B, or cardinality of B exceeds cardinality of A. Okay, so this is actually a non-trivial result. It requires the axiom of choice to establish this. So this is not something that I want to get into in the context of this course, but this is just to kind of point out to you that this definition of cardinality comparison is in some sense consistent and complete, in that it gives you a clean way of ordering the cardinalities of any two sets. You give me any arbitrary sets, either under this notion due to Cantor, the sets are going to be equicardinal, or one of them will have a larger cardinality than the other. Okay, so this is basically the intellectual leap, if you haven't seen this before, on how it is that you compare cardinalities of potentially infinite sets. Okay. With this, there are certain special types of sets that we define and we give names to. Okay, we say that a set is countable if mod A, if the set is equicardinal with the set of natural numbers. Okay, so any set is countable if it is equicardinal with the natural numbers. All right, a set is at most countable if either it is finite or countable. All right, so a set is countable if it is equicardinal with the natural numbers. A set is at most countable if it's either finite or countable. Okay, and finally we say that a set is uncountable if its cardinality exceeds that of the naturals. All right, so these are the three definitions that we have. So if you look at certain books, in certain books, what we have called at most countable is also called countable. Okay, so different authors use slightly different definitions on whether countability. So by the definition that I have presented here, only infinite sets can be countable, because you have to be equicardinal with the naturals to be called countable, right? But it is sometimes useful to also have some name for sets which are either finite or equicardinal with the naturals. Okay, so such sets we are calling at most countable. Certain people just call that set countable. Okay, so I mean, you can have slightly different variations on this definition depending on which book you refer to, but the notation that I'm using here is certainly consistent with Rudin as well as Terence Tao. Okay, so once again, a set is countable if it is equicardinal with the natural numbers. It is at most countable if it's either finite or countable. In other words, it's either finite or equicardinal with the naturals. And finally, we say it's uncountable if its cardinality is more than that of the natural numbers. Okay, so with all of these definitions, now let us go through some examples. Oops. Yeah, now let us go to some examples. Okay, so the first example I'm going to give is to say that the set of integers is countable. Now again, if you're seeing this for the first time, it should be the statement itself should be surprising, right? Because I said that countability is determined by whether or not the set is equicardinal with the natural numbers, right? You might think, how could the natural numbers be equicardinal with the integers? No, because excluding 0, there are, you might think there are twice as many integers as natural numbers. So yeah, this is one of the first counterintuitive aspects that one has to deal with when it comes to set cardinality, that by Cantor's definition, if there is a bijection between two sets, then, well, they are equicardinal. Okay, it is possible to have a bijection between two sets when we are dealing with infinite sets. Okay, this kind of business doesn't happen when we are dealing with finite sets, but it's possible for one infinite set, which is a subset of another infinite set, to still be equicardinal with that set. Right? These kind of counterintuitive things happen only when we are dealing with infinite sets. Okay, so how do I demonstrate that z is countable? Well, I need to show that, I have to demonstrate a function n which goes from the natural numbers to the integers, which is basically a bijection. So we need to show, or rather to construct, f that maps the natural numbers to the integers such that f is a bijection. Okay, so how do I go about doing this? Well, I'm just going to kind of draw a table. It's not going to be an infinite table, but you'll see how I do this. So this is n, let's say, and this is f of n, let's say. Right? How do I define this function? Well, for every element of the natural numbers, I need to tell you what the image is, what is the value is taken by the function. So I need to, for 1, for 2, for 3, for 4, for 5, and so on, I need to tell you what is f of n. Right? So f of n is going to be defined as follows. I'm basically going to write 0 here, 1, minus 1, 2, minus 2, well, 3, minus 3, and so on. Okay, so I'm going to define f of n in this manner. Okay, if you want, let's say, a more like written down definition of f, then you can check that f of n is basically, the way I've done it, it is the floor of n by 2 into minus 1 raised to n. Okay, so this is how I'm going to define this is how I'm going to define f of n. Okay, the first thing to do is to, well, convince yourself that this is in fact a bijection. How do you check that this is a bijection? The way you check that this is a bijection is first to show that every integer is basically f of n for some n. In other words, every integer is in fact the image of f for some natural number. Okay, and f doesn't take repeat values, so it's not possible for, if you take n1 and n2 as two distinct natural numbers, f of n1 is in fact not equal to f of n2. Okay, so stare at this, I mean, either at the table itself or at the written definition that I have. It should be easy enough for you to convince yourself that in fact this f as stated here is in fact a bijection. Okay, so therefore, by this notion, the set of integers is in fact equicardinal with the set of natural numbers. In other words, the set of integers is countable. Okay, now this example is instructive in even another way. If you stare at how I have basically specified the bijection, right? Because I want the bijection to be defined from n to z, all I had to do is basically produce some sort of a listing of the elements of z, right? Effectively, if you look at it, all I have done is identified a listing of all of the elements of the integers. Okay, so in such a way that the list is exhaustive, so every integer should show up in this list exactly once, and I should not, I should not miss out any integers, right? Every integer shows up exactly once, right? So the key takeaway here, in addition to, of course, the fact that the integers are countable, is that specifying a bijection of this form, specifying a bijection, let's say f going from the natural numbers to any set A, boils down to being able to list the elements of A. right? Because if I'm able to basically list the elements of A, that effectively defines the bijection, because I will define f of 1 to be the first element of the list, f of 2 to be the second element of the list, f of 3 to be the third element of the list, and so on, right? So, essentially the takeaway here is that any set is countable if essentially, of course it has to be an infinite set, any set is countable if it is possible to basically arrange the elements of that set into a list in such a way that every element of the set shows up exactly once in that list. So if such a listing is possible, then the set is countable. Okay, so by that same token, you can actually show, I'm going to leave this as an exercise to you, that the set of even integers is countable. Similarly, you should be able to show that the set of all integers which are multiples of 5 are countable, the set of all integers that are multiples of 7 are countable, and so on, right? So all of these things are, these are all countable sets. So this is something that, again, if you are encountering this for the first time, the leap that one has to make is that it is possible for the strict subset of an infinite set to be equicardinal with that infinite set, right? As we are seeing here, the set of naturals is a strict subset of the set of integers, and yet by Cantor's definition, the natural numbers and the integers are equicardinal, right? This is because it's possible to define a bijection between these two infinite sets. Okay, so when it comes to infinite sets, one has to rebalance one's intuition when it comes to set cardinality versus, inclusion and stuff like that. Okay, this is one exercise for you. Another example is that if you look at, let's say, the set of all rationals, between 0 and 1. So I'm writing this as the intersection of Q with the interval 0, 1. Okay, so this is the rationals in the interval 0, 1. Rationals between 0 and 1. All right, so this is in fact also countable. Okay, now how is it that I show this? All I have to say is that every rational between 0 and 1, or the set of all rationals between 0 and 1 can basically be arranged into a list. Okay, so what is the list going to be in this case? Well, my list is going to be as follows. First, I'm going to start off with 0. Then I'm going to write, of course, 1. Then I write half, 1 by 3, 2 by 3, 1 by 4. So what I'm going to do is essentially first write all those, I write them in the, shall we say, the proper form, right? P by Q, where P and Q are relatively prime, right? Because these are rationals between 0 and 1, they will be of the form P by Q, where P and Q are both positive, and Q is greater than P, or rather Q is greater than or equal to P. So first I've written 0 and 1. These are the only two rationals which have a denominator of 1. Then I write half, which is the only guy which has denominator 2. Because remember, 0 by 2 is just 0. That's already been assigned. 2 by 2 is 1, which we have already covered. Similarly, then I move on to denominator 3. 1 by 3 and 2 by 3. 3 by 3 I don't need to write because 3 by 3 is already 1. Similarly, then I move on to denominator 4. 1 by 4. 2 by 4 I don't need to write because it's 1 by 2 already done. Then I write 3 by 4, and then again 4 by 4 is of course done, right? Then I do 1 by 5, 2 by 5, and so on. Okay, so you can convince yourself that this is in fact a valid listing of all rationals between 0 and 1. In what sense? Firstly, of course, by construction of the list, no two rational numbers repeat. And secondly, any rational number between 0 and 1 has a well-defined unique position on this list. So every rational between 0 and 1 shows up exactly once on this list, right? And as I mentioned before, defining this list essentially boils down to defining the bijection, right? Because the first entry of the list is f of 1, the second entry is f of 2, f of 3, f of 4, and so on. So that's your bijection. Okay, so remarkably, if you look at all the rationals between 0 and 1, even that set is countable. Okay. Now you might ask, the next question is the set of all rationals countable? right? And remarkably, the answer is yes. But this follows from the next result that we are going to just show. Okay, so I'm going to prove one more result from which it will actually follow that the set of all rationals, not just the rationals between 0 and 1, but all rationals is also countable. In other words, I can actually, in principle, come up with a bijection from the natural numbers to the rationals. Okay. So theorem, this is actually a more general statement that in fact implies that the set of rationals is countable. Okay, so let n belonging to n be a countable collection of countable sets. Okay, what does that mean? That for every n which is a natural number, en is a countable set. Okay, and because the collection of sets en is indexed by the natural numbers, then that collection is also countable, right? So if I look at a mother set containing e1, e2, e3, e4 and so on, well, that set is countable, and each entity of that mother set is itself a countable set. Okay, so this is what we mean by defining a countable collection of countable sets. In this case, if I look at the union of all of the ens, this is countable. Okay, so in words, what this theorem says is that a countable union of countable sets is countable. Right, that is what this theorem really says. So again, so if this notion of having a countable collection of sets is new to you, then yeah, you should stare at this and first convince yourself that you understand the setting of the theorem in the first place. Okay, so now I want to go through the proof of this. The proof is actually remarkably straightforward. It's basically, I'm just going to draw a picture and show you that this is true. Okay, so what I'm going to use is the fact that the sets e1, e2, e3, e4 and so on, that those sets can be put into a list, right? But every element of this set, right, e1, e2, e3 itself can basically be, the elements of those sets can also be listed. Okay, so the elements, of let's say en can be put into a list. Okay, so let's say that list is x n k, where k is a natural number. Okay, so xn1 is the first element of e1, xn2 is the second element of en, and so on. Okay, now consider the array. The following array. Okay, first what I'm going to do horizontally is basically list the elements of e1. So I would have x1, 1, x1, 2, x1, 3, x1, 4 and so on, right? So remember, these are the elements of e1. Then I write e2, x2, 1, x2, 2, x2, 3, x2, 4 and so on. Then I'm going to list, in the next line I'm going to list the elements of e3, that is x3, 1, 3, 2, 3, 3, 3, 4 and so on. Similarly, I go on. And so on, right? So it's like a two-dimensional array that I have constructed, where each horizontal row of this array is basically, it's an infinite row of course, which is basically a listing of the, if you're looking at the nth row, it's basically a listing of the elements of En, right? And across rows we are changing n essentially, right? So these are the elements of E1, this is E1, these are the elements of E2, these are the elements of E3, and so on. So vertically what we are doing is basically listing all of the sets E1 onwards. Okay, so now if you look at all of these elements in this two-dimensional array, those are all the elements in your union. Right? Now all I have to do is show that it is in fact possible to arrange the elements of this union also into a list. Okay, so the list is basically going to go as follows. It's going to basically be a diagonal sweep of this two-dimensional array. So the first element of my list is going to be x11. Okay, next I'm going to take x21 and x12. So the next diagonal. Then I'm going to take x31, x22, x13. The third diagonal. Then I'm going to take the diagonal below, and so on. So this is how I'm going to sweep this two-dimensional array into a list. Okay, so my first element is x11, then I take x21, x12, then I take x31, x22, x13, then I take x41, 32, 23, 14, and so on. Okay, the thing to convince yourself of is in fact that when I do this so-called diagonal sweep of this two-dimensional array, I will end up arranging the elements of the array into a list such that every element of the array shows up exactly once in my list. Okay, and if you are able to convince yourself of that, then effectively we have constructed a list of the elements of the union of all of the ENs. Right, and basically that itself shows that since it is possible for you to list all of the elements of union over n of En, then therefore that union is countable. Okay, so so some of you might worry about what if there are duplications, right? What if x22 is exactly the same as x31? Well, in that case I'm just going to exclude that in my sweep. Right, so it is possible that, for example, E1 and E2 have certain elements in common, right? It is not, we have not said that these sets are disjoint. In that case, just as we did when it comes to the listing of the rationals, I'm just going to omit those elements that have already been seen before in my sweep, right? But nonetheless, the sweep is still well defined. Every element of the union will show up exactly once in my sweep. Okay, so again, this is something that if this is something you have never seen before, this is something you should ponder about. You should also wonder about why this particular diagonal sweep has been chosen. Try and think about whether there are other ways of sweeping this two-dimensional array which would also give you a valid bijection between the natural numbers and the union of all of the ENs. Okay, so see if you can come up with a different way of arranging the elements of the array into a list. Okay, so now that we have understood this, it should be easy for you to convince yourself that the set of all rationals is countable. Right? Why is this? Well, you should be able to basically say, let's define En as the set of all rationals between say n and n plus 1. Alright? That is a countable set because we have shown that just as the set of rationals between 0 and 1 is countable, the set of rationals between 10 and 11 are also countable, right? And how many such intervals do we have across the real line? Only countably many of them, right? Because we have seen that the integers are countable, right? And what is the set of all rationals? It is the countable union of this, of this collection of countable sets. So by the previous theorem, in fact, the set of rationals is countable, right? Similarly, I leave it to you to show that the Cartesian product of the natural numbers with itself is countable. Okay, now what is the Cartesian product? The Cartesian product is basically the set of tuples, two-dimensional vectors, if you will, let's say of the form n comma m, such that both n and m are natural numbers, right? So n2 or n square as it is sometimes written, sometimes referred to, is basically the set of all tuples of all pairs of natural numbers. Okay, so again, use the same ideas that we had in the previous theorem to argue that the Cartesian product of n with itself is countable. Okay, so far what have we done? So far we have said that okay, it is possible to talk about equicardinality and in fact cardinality comparison even in the context of infinite sets. Okay, this is using the idea of the existence of injections and bijections between the two sets. Okay, based on this notion of cardinality comparison, we basically say that a set is countable if it is equicardinal with the natural numbers. Okay, a set is uncountable if it has a cardinality that is more than that of the natural numbers. And finally, a set is at most countable if it is either finite or it is countable. Right? So after these definitions, all we have really done is given a bunch of examples of countable sets. So we proved that the set of all integers is also countable. Similarly, the set of all integers that are multiples of k for whatever favorite number k you have is countable. The set of rationals in the interval 0, 1 is countable. And then we proved one important result, which is that the countable union of a countable collection of sets is countable. Right? And a consequence of that is in fact that the set of all rationals is also countable, and that the set of pairs of integers, the set of pairs of natural numbers, so n2, is countable. Okay, so with all of this, we will stop this video. In the next, what we are going to do is basically demonstrate several interesting sets which are in fact uncountable. Okay, sets that have a cardinality which is provably more than that of the natural numbers. All right.